How do you solve a problem like Boeing? Well, it has been another tumultuous week for the company, with airlines, regulators, and passengers once again in the eye of the storm. Yahoo Finance has been across the fast-moving story for you. Now, with regulators, airlines, and passengers all in the eye of the storm, where does Boeing go next? I'm going to take a look at the stock price reaction here, because Boeing clearly under a bit of pressure, with shares off just about 30% since the start of the year. You can see the movement to the downside here today, trading just above $182 a share. So we want to bring in Mike Boyd, Boyd Group International President. And Mike, where does Boeing go from here? We talk about the fact that the stock has been under a tremendous amount of pressure, off 30%. Do you see more downside risk here in the near term for Boeing?
Absolutely. Boeing has relegated itself into a second place, a distant second place behind Airbus, with this entire fiasco with the MAX. This has been going on now for what, 4 years, 5 years now? And again, a lot of it's oversight. We haven't had FAA oversight. So well, this has to come into the program. But right now, Airbus probably is going to end up with about 350 to 400 more airplanes they wouldn't have had before, simply because Boeing can't produce. And Boeing can't really maintain the confidence of the airline industry anymore. There has to be a complete change at the top of that organization. Because right now, I mean, Airbus, I guarantee you, they're looking at taking that 70 acres they got down in Mobile and expanding their factory. Because over the next 5 to 6 years, those Dash 10s that aren't going to airlines, they're going to be A321s. They're going to need that production capacity.
Mike, Boeing kicking the tires on an acquisition of Spirit Aerosystems. Will that remediate any of the near-term problems and at least bring some of the production in-house fully for Boeing, after they had essentially split out that group and it became its own entity years back?
Well, who cares really who owns the stock in Spirit? The fact is, Boeing is its major, not only, but its major customer. Boeing should have been on top of that regardless of whether they own the entity or not. So this is just like a placebo. The fact is, we've got to stop kicking tires here, and we've got to recognize that Boeing's problems are more than just one company. This is our biggest exporter. And right now today, it is relegating itself to a distant second behind the only other game in town, which is Airbus. So if they buy Aero Systems or not, doesn't make any difference. We have to fix that. Plus, we have to fix the oversight. The FAA was on site this entire time. So they're not particularly clean on this either, and they have to move their game up as well.
And thanks so much for comprehending my typo in spoken form there in airlines versus Aero Systems. Very two different spirits there, Mike. So appreciate that. You know, what is the new MAX head that steps into this role? What should be the day one priority for them?
The day one priority has to clean out the what's gone on in manufacturing. Look, as I pointed out, in an airline, if you fix an airplane, the mechanic has to fix it. You have to know who it is. He signs off, or she signs off. Then an inspector comes in and signs off. What we found out now is that's not what Boeing was doing. They can't tell you who worked on that airplane that Alaska had the problem with. That is outrageous. An airline would get shut down for that. So what we have to have is now some really strong oversight, and the people at the top have to be held accountable, and that has not really been done yet. Throwing a guy under the bus doesn't fix the problem.
Mike, are you confident that it's actually going to happen this time? People will be held accountable?
I don't know. The FAA has not done a very good job of oversight up till now. Mm-hmm. Let's hope they do. Like I said, they're like Louis Renault in the movie Casablanca. They're shocked to find this is going on. They've been on site all this time, so they have to move their game up a whole lot more.
The FAA, if I'm remembering correctly, they are budgeting for a considerable amount more for their own capital expenditures over the course of this year. They're looking at air traffic control. Where would you like to see the budget for the FAA really take into account what needs to be looked at in the factory production, the manufacturing processes that they do have people placed within for quality assurance checks?
Yeah, the FAA's responsibilities are wide. There's no question about it. But the fact of the matter is they have oversight of what manufacturers are doing, what suppliers are doing, what overhaul facilities are doing. They got to move that game up. And boy, you want to get into foreign overhaul facilities, they got a whole lot of work to do. So, you know, one job I don't want is to be ahead of the FAA. But guess what? Someone's going to have to take that job and shake it like a dead chicken.
Mike, you've listed out a long list of improvements that Boeing should and needs to make here in order to win back the confidence. I'm curious, though, what, in your view, should be that number one priority?
Right now, today, we know this. Oversight of Boeing has not been acceptable. That probably means oversight of a lot of overhaul facilities may not be acceptable. It may mean other areas of the FAA. So they got to clean up their game. Again, Boeing's responsible for this, but the FAA has to be our guy on site to make sure that we don't have any more of these MAX fiascos or these Alaska fiascos that we had.
What are you going to be tracking, Mike, to understand what the mindset of the consumer is while they see headlines like this coming across?
It's getting dangerous. I mean, there was a period back in the 1960s when the Lockheed Electra started to fall out of the sky, and people literally were calling airlines to see, am I on an Electra or not? I don't think it'll get to that, but if this keeps going, because remember, if there's a Boeing airplane with so much as a lavatory that doesn't work, it hits the headlines as another Boeing problem. So Boeing is behind the curve here, but the real curve here is fixing this problem as quickly as we possibly can and having the FAA being able to assure us that they are on top of it, not now, but going into the future.
All right, in our conversations with some of the booking sites, maybe we will have to ask them how many people are filtering based on that. That might give us a little bit of an indicator as well in the interim period. Mike Boyd, always a pleasure to speak with you, get some of your insights. Boyd Group International President, thanks.
Thank you, sir.
The New York Times reports an FAA audit of the manufacturer's 737 MAX production found dozens of issues. The Times report reveals the company failed 33 of 89 audits. The investigation coming after a door panel blew off a MAX 9 plane on an Alaskan Airlines flight in early January. Shares of Boeing are trading lower this morning, and we're seeing the negative ramifications from this Boeing incident ripple across the airline industry. Shares of Southwest Airlines declining this morning after that airline revealed it plans to cut flying capacity for the full year, citing challenges from Boeing in getting deliveries of some of its planned aircrafts. This comes after United and Delta both announced deliveries of MAX 10 jets could be delayed as late as 2027 here. And we've got team coverage. Yahoo Finance's Pras Subramanian and Alexis Keenan are here. Pras, let's start with you with what we've been able to dig into and the impact for Boeing as well as the rest of the airline operations here at this point.
Yeah, Brad, you mentioned Southwest there, right? Stock kind of falling here because of that concern about capacity. So, Boeing had informed them earlier that they're going to deliver only 46 737 MAX jets to them, as opposed to 58 that they originally ordered. And then Southwest also said that Boeing informed them that the 79 MAX planes overall that they wanted to order, a bunch of those were MAX 7s. Those planes aren't even certified yet. So some concern there about how they can get more jets to increase capacity. This follows Alaska Air, which suffered that door plug blowout, to say its 2024 capacity is, quote, in flux due to uncertainty around the timing of aircraft deliveries. We've heard United is looking at Airbuses, right? Some Airbus jets to kind of compensate for that lost capacity. So Boeing really in sort of a crisis mode here as they kind of are having problems fulfilling their order bank, but also facing some scrutiny from the FAA and also DOJ.
Yeah, and I want to bring in Alexis on that. Alexis, what do you make of these potential legal challenges that Boeing is facing and what that then could mean for their business strategy going forward?
Yeah, so right now, this New York Times report, whether it will lead to additional legal problems for Boeing, we don't know. What this is it's the New York Times getting a peek at a slide presentation that gives more detail than what we knew last week on March 4th, when the FAA said that there were multiple failures in Boeing's manufacturing process. And these are failures in requirements, right? They're not suggestions. They're not things Boeing should do or should be mindful of. These are manufacturing quality control compliance requirements. And what this New York Times report is saying is that after a six-week audit of that door plug incident that blew out on the Alaska Air Boeing MAX 737-9 aircraft, that there were 33 failures of 89 different checks. So we're talking about just under 40% of the checks that the FAA wanted to conduct at Boeing to see if the manufacturing was on target. Now, that's just Boeing. and you add to that Spirit Aerosystems that makes the fuselage for their aircraft. Separately, that had 7 of 13 of these FAA checks failing in compliance for these production line requirements. So both at Boeing and Spirit, and of course, you also have Boeing considering right now reacquiring Spirit Aerosystems that had previously spun off years ago. But this audit is really highlighting, we'll wait to see more, but these production failures at both of those places. Some of these details in this New York Times report also said that the FAA reserved mechanics at Spirit using a hotel key card to check door seals, also applying Dawn soap as a lubricant to check the door seals. In response to all of this, Boeing tells Yahoo Finance that it would like to revert back to the regulators, to the FAA, to safety authorities on this. They're not really responding directly to this report as of right now.
And Alexis, while we have you, we do know that a former Boeing employee who previously raised safety issues over the aircraft company's production has reportedly been found dead. What more do we know about this right now?
Yes. So his name is John Barnett. He is a 32-year veteran, a quality control manager at Boeing, now retired or had been retired prior to his body being found on March 9th in Charleston, South Carolina, in a parking lot. Now, he was a whistleblower, longtime whistleblower going back to 2017, complaining about quality issues where he worked, which was at the factory in South Carolina where the 787 Dreamliner is built. Now, he had been giving evidence in a whistleblower suit, and he was deposed by Boeing's attorneys last week. He was set to give more evidence on that Saturday when his body was discovered. A lot more to be learned here. He was dead apparently of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. However, authorities there in Charleston, they are investigating, but he had complained 2017, and in 2019, the FAA had actually taken some actions that were asking Boeing to make some corrections that were similar to some of the things that he was complaining about. Whether they were actually tied together, we don't know at this point. In response to Mr. Barnett's death, Boeing said, "We are saddened by Mr. Barnett's passing, and our thoughts are with his family and friends."
All right, Alexis Keenan, Subramanian, thanks so much for joining us on that conversation here this morning.
The FAA audit finds dozens of issues with Boeing's 737 MAX jet production. That's at least according to the New York Times. To break down what these struggles spell out for the company, Alexis Keenan is here. Alexis, we're talking about Boeing under pressure again. They have been under constant pressure, and this only adds to that.
Yeah, that's exactly how I was going to say it. This really adds to this mountain of headwinds that the company is facing for this MAX family of aircraft. You had United, Southwest talking about delivery delays for this aircraft. They're relying on it or had been relying on it. And then the New York Times coming out saying that they have viewed some detailed findings of this FAA audit that was related to the Alaska Air door plug failure that happened back in January. That's what prompted it. And what the FAA was looking into is the manufacturing quality control issues at the company to try to figure out what was going wrong here. So the door plug failure on the Alaska Airlines also was reported to have multiple failures. And that was the FAA talking about its report last week. But what we're hearing from the New York Times are a bit more of the details here. So what they're saying is that this audit found production failures for the MAX on 33 of 89 points that were inspected. So if we're talking about percentages, about almost 40% of the points they wanted to check for the regulator didn't come through as they should have. Now, these are requirements. They're not suggestions. Also, the audit finding that Spirit Aerosystems, that makes the fuselage for the 737 MAX family of aircraft, the FAA found production failures at 17 of 13 checks that they went through. Also, this report saying that the FAA saw mechanics at Spirit Aerosystems using a hotel key card to check a door seal, also applying some Dawn soap as a lubricant for door seals. So some disturbing sounding things there we're hearing. We don't know at this point if this will lead to any legal actions. But in addition, you have the DOJ reportedly opening this criminal probe into the same incident. In response to this report from the New York Times, Boeing is telling Yahoo Finance that they would defer back to the FAA, back to regulators. They're not really responding here exactly to this report.
And Alexis, in some tragic news, a former Boeing employee who previously raised safety issues over the aircraft company's production has been found dead. What more do we know about that?
So this man who was found dead, he was found dead in Charleston, South Carolina, and that was on Saturday. And he was a former quality control manager for Boeing, who had been a long-time whistleblower, had been complaining about quality issues at the South Carolina factory where the 787 Dreamliner is built. Now, he had a lawsuit against the company, and he was in the midst of giving some testimony, giving a deposition, talking about his case. And he was set to give, I think, what it was, the second portion of that testimony, but that never happened. He was found in a Holiday Inn parking lot in his vehicle. The police report says that there was a wound to his head. He was holding a weapon, a gun that apparently maybe had been used in order to take his life, but we do not know that. This is under investigation, but he was a 32-year veteran of Boeing, and he had filed whistleblower complaints through the years. Some of the things he talked about in his reports were substandard parts being used on aircrafts, also had filed reports about non-working oxygen masks. And the FAA had, in fact, issued some directives that were related to some of those things, or at least the FAA's directives out to Boeing to do some repair or a remediation of these things. They sounded very much like some of his complaints. We don't know if they were definitely related, but Boeing responding here to Mr. Barnett's death, saying that we are saddened by Mr. Barnett's passing and our thoughts are with his family and friends. Ladies.
Thank you so much. Certainly putting more spotlight on Boeing, unfortunately, there. Alexis Keenan, thank you so much.
Boeing's bumpy start to 2024 is hitting its customers. Several airlines looking to cut back on flights and temper hiring plans, citing uncertainty tied to fewer Boeing deliveries. With more on the impact, we're speaking with Helene Becker, TD Cowen Senior Research Analyst. Hey, Helene, it's great to see you. So we heard from Southwest today, and we've got tough language from the United CEO talking about not wanting the further out deliveries from the MAX 10 from Boeing. First of all, sort of big picture, how much of a problem is this for the industry now that they're probably not going to get as many planes as they thought?
Yeah, well, it's a problem because they can't grow as much as they originally thought, which I think investors, when they think about it, will appreciate. But demand is very strong, and we still have air traffic control issues, especially in the Northeast. And we really appreciate the FAA's comments recently that they are working on a college to air traffic controller program. But pragmatically, it limits the whole idea of not being able to get the aircraft you thought you were going to get. Means that there's going to be a cap on jobs, of course. United, Southwest, and a few other airlines, I think JetBlue is in that category, have all said that they've put plans to hire and train new pilots and flight attendants on hold. So that limits growth. And then, of course, going from smaller aircraft to larger aircraft doesn't help consumers because the larger aircraft gives you greater comfort in the planes, and it also enables growth at busy airports without necessarily adding service. So all in all, it really limits the opportunity for consumers and for corporates because I've always said, Julie, that without a robust airline industry, it's really hard to have a robust economy.
I think Warren Buffett might have something to say about that. I'm wondering, we have the headlines are grabbed by the 737 MAX issues, and we've seen problems with the 787 Dreamliner and other models over the last few years. How much of this is just a giant Boeing problem, and then what does that say as to the overhang of the industry? How does the industry crawl out of this?
Yeah, so I can't really comment to Boeing specifically because it's not in my coverage universe. But I can say that from an industry perspective, the airlines have done what they always do, and that's adapt. They are cutting their capacity growth. They're restructuring their order books. And that's really important. People don't think about that because as deliveries move to the right, you might have fewer aircraft deliveries this year. Say you were expecting 100 and you only get 50. That means 50 from this year slide into next year. And then at some point in the future, we expect that, and our analyst who covers Boeing does expect that they'll catch up. And so maybe in 2 or 4 years, you wind up taking delivery of 4 times as many aircraft as you otherwise would have, and you have to restructure the order book because no system can handle 200 deliveries in 1 year versus 50 or 100. You can probably handle 100, which when you think about it is still one roughly a week, one every 3.5, 4 days. So it's still a lot of capacity, but it postpones growth, and it means that airlines have to rethink their plans in that regard.
So, Helene, if investors are looking at airlines right now and trying to figure out where there might be opportunity, are those that are more reliant on Airbus to supply them with planes at an advantage? Is that where investors should be looking right now? Or are there still sort of Boeing-heavy airlines that are good investments?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So we have Delta and United as well as Copa as kind of our top 3 choices this year. Delta and United kind of split their aircraft between Airbus and Boeing, and Copa is an all Boeing fleet. So, and that's a Panama-based airline, which has great growth and a roughly 6% dividend yield. So that's one that we like quite a lot. But going back to Delta and United, our view there is that they're very well positioned to grow internationally and domestically with the focus on larger aircraft. And of course, you heard, I think both Ed or Glenn at Delta this morning say that, I guess Ed said earlier in the week, that they expect the MAX 10 not to be delivered before 2027. And I feel like United said something similar, and that's why they've taken it out of the schedule. So I don't know that it directly answers your question, but both United and Delta are top picks. We recently upgraded American for the international component, and really that's how we're thinking about it. Strong international demand, recovering domestic. People are back in the office at least 4 days a week these days, 3 or 4 days a week, and we're seeing managed corporate travel increase again. So I think things are going well. I just think that nobody believes it. I think investors are skeptical. And remember, in the last decade pre-pandemic, we heard several airline managers say airlines will never lose money again. And that proved not to be too correct. So I think the market is rightly skeptical, but if the airlines can deliver on what they say they can, I think you'll see that reflected in the stock prices over the next, say, 18 months or so.
Yeah, I think we'll see Berkshire buys Delta headlines sometime in the next 10 years. It'll be there, though. All right, you got to go. Really appreciate your time here, Lynn.
No worries, anytime.